I'm just going to start off by saying I know this video is going to get very little views on this channel, but I feel duty bound to subscribers, even though I will make no money off this, to speak to you. If you plan on owning a house, if you plan on owning real estate, handing off something to your kids, someday the opportunity is slipping away, and there is no better time because there may be no other time to invest and purchase real estate, including just your own primary home, than over the next 5 or 10 years. If you look at the data, 15 years ago, about 10% of the sales that were happening in the real estate market were from investors. Then taking us from 2012 all the way to maybe 2020, we're looking at about 15% of the sales are now investors. All right, now going from 2020 to 2023, we're looking at almost 20% of sales are happening to investors. And so far in the year 2025, we've seen almost 26% of all home sales are going to investors. And this needs to be said, once a property goes into an investor's hands, it is very unlikely that that property is ever going to go back from a rental property into a primary home for somebody that owns it. You take that data and you take where housing prices have gone in the last 15 years and where there's a good chance they go in the next 10 to 15 years. And there's a very good chance that home ownership in America is disappearing very, very quickly. Whether you're looking to own your own home or looking to build a real estate portfolio that you can build to build wealth the way millions and millions of people have, hand it off to your kids and build generational wealth, any of those things, it's an opportunity that's slipping away. So I spent the last 7 years learning everything I can about real estate and getting into as many real estate deals as I possibly can. And this video is going to tell you everything you need to know if you're coming in with zero understanding of real estate, just a pipe dream that you want to own your own home someday, or you want to own a real estate property that you can rent out someday. This video will be everything you need to start making your first few purchases. Even if you're coming in with no money for down payments, even if you have a job that doesn't pay you enough to be able to qualify for a second mortgage that you think. This video will share all that with you. So many cool ways to get into real estate. I literally believe almost anyone can get into real estate right now, but perhaps not so in the future. So let's dive in. We're going to do tons of real world examples to help you understand all of these different points that we're going to talk about. But here's what we're going to go over. We're going to talk about timing the market. When should you be buying? Should you buy now? Wait a few years? Should you have bought 3 years ago? Probably. Hint. What types of real estate investments are we looking at? How do we find and recognize when a good deal is there? And how do we negotiate to make that a good deal? And we're going to talk about financing. If you don't have any money coming into this, how do you get into real estate if you have nothing to start with? You can't afford a down payment. How do you finance something when the rates are crazy right now? What are some other options out there for financing? What kind of risks are you taking for you and your family? And how can we mitigate or completely remove those risks? And then finally, I'll go over some DFY options. So if you're someone coming in this with a lot of money, perhaps you've got a great income, you want to get into real estate, but you really don't have the time to spend, and real estate often requires. We'll go over some really cool done-for-you real estate packages that I've used multiple times to get real estate for almost no time and just putting in some money for someone else to find the deal for you and get it all set up. Number one, let's talk about timing. You're probably watching this thinking, oh, the real estate market's going to crash. I'm going to wait and I'm going to get in when it crashes. It's really a bummer feeling to get into something and find out that it lost value a year later. Right? I've bought stocks before that lost 30% within that first year, and you feel like you just were so dumb and like, what was I thinking? I should have waited. Well, let's talk about timing the real estate market. You can see here, it's technically possible. The real estate market isn't always going up, but let's talk about the mindsets of people along this journey. You can see there were probably a lot of people as the market was going up here, 2002, 2003, right? They were saying, we should be waiting. The market's been going up. And in fact, if I went back a little more, you can see the market had gone up quite a bit before this. There's probably a lot of people thinking it's going to crash. It's going to crash. It's going to crash. I shouldn't buy. But for most of these people buying up here, right, all the way till about here, even the crash still wouldn't have yielded them results any better than the current timing. So anyone that bought in 2004 would have bought at about the lowest point of the 2008 to 2010 financial crash. Now, a lot of people did get some good deals there. A lot of investors, honestly, scooped up a lot of good deals right here. Then the market started to recover. And what happened is right about here, right after all the deals kind of disappeared and things got back to normal in 2012, maybe 2013, is all these people thinking they were going to time the market started to wait. Okay, we're going to wait. We're going to wait for another crash like that because that was crazy. We're hesitant here, right? So they waited for a crash. They waited for a crash. They probably thought maybe they'd get one there. No, maybe they waited. Oh, look, maybe in 2018, there's a crash because things are kind of stalling. No, right? So you see all these people just waited and they missed their opportunity. It never came back to those levels. And it is extremely doubtful. I don't know anyone that thinks it's going to come back down here to these levels that we're seeing in 2012 to 2014. So everybody that waited to time it lost their opportunity, right? Now when COVID hit, you can see there was another little dip and people thought, oh, this is it. This is my timing. Look how big that dip is. 329 to 317 was our average price. Not a very big dip. And then it just exploded. And everybody that thought, I'm just going to wait a little longer, I'm going to time this right, missed out on one of the biggest real estate booms in US history, right? In just 2 years, the average home price went up, if my math is correct here, which it may not be, 45%. So I want to say this at the beginning of this video as clearly as possible. Attempting to time the real estate market very rarely works for people. Sure, there are some lucky people that make it happen. It rarely works, and in the end usually just leaves you running, trailing behind, hoping, waiting, and not getting the deal you were hoping to get. A better way to get into the real estate market is to dollar cost in, which means you buy when you have a chance. You buy when you have enough money to buy, and then you start working towards your next one, and you just continually average into the real estate market. A few of your homes may be purchased at a higher price than you could have got them a year later, but overall you'll find you tend to do better following this strategy than just trying to wait and wait and wait for that perfect opportunity and timing to come. Number 2, let's talk about the different types of investments that you can make. They're all over out there. We're going to talk about 2 in particular, and then we're going to break out the one that I think we should be focusing on. So we all know there's commercial real estate and there's residential real estate. We're going to completely scoop commercial real estate out of the picture. I do not think you should be getting into commercial real estate. It's very volatile, and over the next 30 years, we really don't know what AI and a lot of other things are going to do, and they can affect commercial real estate quite hard. But we do know that people are going to be living in homes. And in particular, we do know that people are going to be living in single family homes. Sure, there will still be apartments and things like that. But if you're looking to get into something that's easy to get out of, easy to get in, there will always be demand for, that even in downturns, people are looking for, you get into single family homes. Now, when we get into single family homes, we're going to break that down into 3 different categories. A single family home can be short-term rented. We've got Airbnb and VRBO. We've all stayed in those. It can be mid-term rented, which a lot of people don't know about. But what that is where you take people that need a home for 2 to 4 to 6 months and you rent to them and you kind of price it in between short-term rental pricing and long-term rental pricing. There's actually a really good sweet spot here. We'll talk about it in a little bit. And then there's long-term, which is people just signing year contracts, a very traditional rental policy. Now let's talk about which one you should be getting into. We have a couple short-term rentals, and if I'm being honest, they're the most volatile. They're the most easy to mess up on, meaning if you time it poorly or you do your numbers wrong or anything in the beginning, you can really take a beating. And if you buy them in a specialty market, like next to a national park or something, they can be very hard to get out of as well. All of that being said, they have the potential for the most gains, right? Making $1,000 a month off of an Airbnb in cash flow after all your expenses is actually a totally possible thing. Now, midterm is where I tend to find the sweet spot. These are people who, to give an example, their company had them move from one state to another state. And while they're looking for a home in that other state, their company put them up in a midterm rental. Typically, it's about 3 to 4 months. The company's happy to pay a couple $1,000s a month, which is quite a bit more than the average rent for a year contract would be in that area. Other examples could be insurance. Their house burned down and they need another house and their insurance put them up, things like that. Now, midterm rentals can generate $400 to $600 a month pretty easily, and that's a pretty good standard for a midterm rental. The nice thing is if there's no one there, you can also short-term rent it out on platforms like Airbnb if you buy it in the right place. And typically midterm rentals tend to be in safe locations. For example, we own one in Texas, just right in the middle of Fort Worth, and then we have one in the capital of Oklahoma as well, which means that we tend to be able to short-term rent it, we tend to be able to midterm rent it, and we tend to be able to long-term rent it. If we need to get out of it, it's a pretty hot moving market. It's a single family home in a very good location with lots of movement. And so they're easy to get in, they're easy to get out of, they're easy to spread across all 3 of those different methods. And for me, I really found that they're a sweet spot. The only caveat with these is they tend to be more expensive. If you're coming in with no money, it's hard to get a short-term rental because you're going to have to furnish it and do some things that cost quite a bit of money. And your third option is a traditional long-term rental. Now, with the way everything is right now, cash flow is hard on these. You can expect to make $100 a month, $200 a month on a good deal, or break even on most bad deals. Or if you're putting almost no money down on some of these deals, you may even expect to lose a little bit of money every month. You may not lose money in the long run, and you probably won't, but month to month, you may actually be losing a little bit of money on a long-term rental investment in a single family home right now. Now, I would recommend with your first deal, doing a long-term single family rental home. Everything about it is going to be simpler and it's going to be less risky. And that's not to say you couldn't do one of these other ones if you happen to have some knowledge or you live really near something that no one else knows about, or you find a deal. But that's where I'd start my search and where I'd start my real estate portfolio if I'm looking to get one piece of real estate on one piece of real estate before things get crazy. All right, finding deals. Now, this is something that was so hard for me in the beginning. There wasn't a lot out there that I could see or recognize. And how would I, even if I recognize one, how would I approach it and find it? Over the years, as I built up my network and got more into this, I can say that deals start coming up like crazy and you start to see good deals all over and say no to a lot of the average or even like decently good deals. So this is something that you kind of just build over time with networking and with connecting and with recognizing when a deal is good. The first place I would always look is your own area, because you know that better than anyone else. You know things that outside investors and investors in general probably just don't know and will miss. You know where people actually want to live, why they want to live there. You know where people don't want to live, and all that stuff's not going to show up on a comparative report or on a piece of paper that says this is the value of the home. That stuff shows up when the renter shows up and they're doing research and they're living there and they're trying to figure out where they want to live. That's when that kind of stuff actually shows up. So start looking around you, the area that you know better than anyone else. Now, step one, everyone always says you got to find off-market deals. You got to dig in and find things that no one else even knows about. And those are out there, but the MLS really isn't bad. The MLS means Zillow or your local MLS. For me, it's utahrealestate.com, and each state kind of has a different one, but that's where the realtors go, and just once someone signs on at the realtor, they throw it onto the MLS, and it's got all the different listings. About 95% of the real estate for sale will be on that MLS. But there's two things that I would look for that give you an advantage on an MLS that other people may or may not be able to see and look for. The first one is value add. So to give you a good example of what I'm talking about, we're going to look at this Mississippi house. Now, I lived in Mississippi, so it's a market I'm familiar with. And if you look here, we've got a 2,600 square foot home, but it's only got 3 bedrooms. I'm coming in this assuming that they've got space for another, probably 2 bedrooms, right? Most 3-bedroom homes are somewhere in the range of 1,500 square feet. So I'm looking at this saying, I could probably add 2 bedrooms. Now, each bedroom could probably add about $300 in rentability, or $300 more a month that I could rent it for. And the square footage is already there, which means that I could put it in for a fraction of the cost that you would typically need to make an addition on a home. A similar one in Arkansas, you can see I've got a 2,600 square foot home, but it's only got 3 beds and 2 baths, which means we can probably add a couple bedrooms and get a lot more rent than other people that are looking at this deal might realize. So to give you a good example, we bought this cabin in the forest last year. We went down into the basement and they had a garage, a 2-car garage that wasn't really being used. Now, the crazy thing about this is they had already heated the garage, they had already insulated the garage, they had already drywalled the garage. Literally, all we had to do was take these 2 garage doors, close them off, and add a regular door instead, and we added almost 500 square feet to the size of this home because the garage wasn't initially included in the square footage of the home. We could have turned that into 1 or 2 bedrooms, and for the Airbnb, we ended up doing 1 bedroom plus a big game room. But what we were able to do with a very minimal amount of money is we were able to double the potential occupancy of this home, and we were able to rent it out for a lot more than other people coming in could see. They couldn't see that and didn't see that value add, and so what they saw was a 2 bedroom, and what their numbers and everything that they looked at looked like they probably weren't going to be able to be profitable on this smaller 2 bedroom. But we were able to add square footage, we were able to add a whole new game room and add a bunch of beds, and able to make a lot more than other people could see. Adding a bedroom and converting a garage are by far my 2 favorite ways to value add a home. Now, the second thing you're going to look for is what I call intangibles. Now, what I'm talking about with intangibles are, you think of those things that are like vibe things, right? So I could take a house and I can put it on a piece of paper and say it's got this much square footage and it's this new and it's got this many bathrooms and this is the quality of the bathroom, but it can still be a totally different house in terms of vibe. Renters, purchasers look at the vibe, and a lot of investors just don't see that. So to give you a good example of what I'm talking about, these are 2 homes I was offered. We ended up buying one of them, and they're the exact same price. So you can see this one right here. On paper, they were the same. They were the same size, same bedroom, same bathroom. And then the other one was this one right here, okay? Now I'm picturing what a renter wants to do, right? I know a renter with a couple kids. They want to go live in a little neighborhood. They would love it if behind them wasn't another house staring in their window, right? Make it feel like there's more space. Since most people like to be outside, and a lot of these places in the US are hot, I know that they would probably rather their front door face west so that their backyard faces east. When the sun's going down and the evening's there, they've got a lot of room to barbecue. Either that or they've got all these trees, right? I'm picturing the person living there and they're hanging out in their backyard. They've got a barbecue, they've got some games, they've got friends coming over. That's not really happening in this house. Similarly, this neighborhood is in the middle of a small neighborhood, close to a park, close to the school, and kind of far away from the city. And this one is in the neighborhood, but it's much closer to the city. You can see it's a less established neighborhood. There's a lot less trees and everyone's a little closer together and you can kind of like see each other. And most people kind of prefer the vibe of the first. So just by being informed and putting in the effort to actually think through and look through, and you put some time into a property, you can get quite a bit of a better deal than a lot of these maybe bigger companies that are investing based on numbers, data, and not actually visualizing and seeing and thinking through each individual purchase because of the bulk volume in which they buy property. The second way you can find deals is through some of the local buy and sell pages. So where I live, we have an app called KSL. People use it to do buy and sell like a marketplace, and there's actually quite a bit of real estate on there. If you don't have something like that, there's always Facebook Marketplace, which does pretty well. So I can head to the Facebook Marketplace here, you can see, and I can type in real estate. There's always going to be a bunch of junk on these pages, but you can see there's dotted real estate, actual real property for sale throughout here. Now, you're probably not looking for some big, huge thing. That's probably not going to be priced anything better, but you may find deals on here where people, for whatever reason, don't want to use the MLS. They don't want to use realtors. They don't want to use any of that. They just want to throw it online. And sometimes you'll find that these people want to sell quickly. They want to sell in a few days. They want, for whatever reason, they're in a hurry. But for whatever reason, you'll sometimes find deals on Facebook Marketplace. So you can see here, looking for builds, houses. Like I can tell you right here, just knowing my local market pretty well, that this is probably a pretty decent deal right here. Now, I know you're looking at this and saying, that's a decent deal, $600,000 for a 5-bedroom house. Yes, in my local marketplace, that is a good deal. Hopefully this awakens you to the fact that real estate's cranking up and we need to get involved in it. And the last way that I've personally used that's actually worked fairly well and given me some of the best deals is sending out postcards. And I know that might not feel right because you've probably all received postcards. If you own real estate, you get postcards in the mail. People saying, hey, I want to buy your house. I'll give you cash right now, all that stuff. Now, the way I do it is it's slightly different, but the idea is real. It's a way to get in front of people's faces. And the concept here is a lot of people are just thinking of selling. For years, they're thinking of selling. For whatever reason, life's busy, right? Most of us are kind of just barely hanging on a lot of the time. And for years, people won't go and sell either an investment property or even their main property, or they inherit a property or something like that, right? And they've just got this property sitting there and life's just so busy, they don't want to they don't have time to deal with realtors and getting online, the pictures, all that fun stuff. So it just sits there in the back of their mind. They're like, I'm going to sell that one day. And they get a postcard in the mail one day. It says, hey, I'm interested in your property. I saw that you own it. Happy to do a fair, to get something fair set up with you. If you want, we can make it pretty quick. Let's get this moving. And they're like, okay, that's the spark I needed.
Yes.
And the beauty of this is you're not in a competitive market anymore. It's you. It's just you and them negotiating. You don't have any other buyers. You don't have this time crunch of like, I better get an offer in quick before someone else does. You can just work through it slowly. And this is how we found one of my favorite properties, honestly. And so there's a couple ways. You have to use different websites to get the information. So what you'll do is you'll pick a neighborhood, somewhere that maybe it's harder to get property. There's nothing for sale there. It's a smaller neighborhood. So in my case, it was a couple hundred lots in a little cabin area in northern Utah. You'll pick the neighborhood and then you can use different softwares. I use one called PropStream, and you can tell it to download all the names and addresses of the property owners in that neighborhood. Now, once you have all those addresses in a spreadsheet, you can upload it to, there's tons of different sites. Vistaprint is one, but there's literally dozens of them. And you can upload it and you can choose these handwritten fonts and stuff like that. And you can send out these handwritten, or at least they look handwritten. I think they're written by robots that kind of move these pens around. But anyway, they look handwritten, and it sends out and catches people's eye. And you can send out 500 postcards for, I think it cost me maybe $1,000 to send out 500 postcards, probably less than that. So it does cost money, but you can very easily get a bunch of responses and get 3 or 4 good deals in the pipeline by doing this method. And they tend to be much better because you're not having to compete with the marketplace. If you can't spend money on postcards, you can literally look up and call the people. There's phone numbers on there a lot of times. You just need to make sure they're not on a do not call list or anything. You can go knock on the doors. There's tons of people that look around their own neighborhoods. They just walk around, bike around. They find empty houses that are clearly abandoned. They can use that property site to look up the owners, and they reach out and say, hey, this property is abandoned. You haven't used it in a year. You haven't used it in 5 years, it looks like. Would you like to sell to me? I'll go rehab it and get it, on the market. And they're like,
oh yeah, the house was in such disarray. I didn't want to sell it. It seemed like so much work to get it ready to sell. I totally would be interested in that. And you can grab yourself a bargain.
Because people are just too busy to do everything they need. And a lot of times they're just overwhelmed with the idea of taking an old house with furniture in it and all this junk, getting it cleaned up enough to sell. All right, moving on. Let's talk about negotiating deals. Now I'm going to add a caveat. We kind of negotiate our own deals now because we've been in it for long enough. We know the process. We know how to not look like we're brand new at this when we talk to people and things like that.
Everything's done.
I would say for your first deal, I would still use a realtor. If you've never purchased real estate, there are some things you'll want to know, and you probably will come across looking a little new to the whole process if you're trying to negotiate without ever having purchased a property before. So I would use a local realtor the first time. Now you can negotiate with the realtor. You can call a couple realtors in the area, and the typical commission is 3%. That's no longer, though, the required commission. So you can say, hey, would you do this for 2? There are ones that'll do it for 1. There are ones that'll do it for flat rate in a lot of states. So look around, find yourself a realtor. But here's the key to negotiating. Here's 4 or 5 different things you're going to look at. First one is you want to get as much information as possible. If you can call the owner and talk to them, you'll find they tend to be more open about everything, and you'll learn some things that will be very helpful in negotiations. Realtors, if you talk to the realtor, tend to be a little more closed, but you can still get some stuff. The biggest one for me has always been timing. why are you selling? And you try to figure out if someone is in a rush to sell. Because if they're in a rush to sell, you can obviously tend to get a better deal. So the ideal properties for me, if I'm looking on the marketplace, are properties that have been on for 90, 120 days, something like that. Now it's, let's say, October. Maybe it's in a community where winter access is limited, or in general, all communities that are like snowy and stuff tend to slow down in the winter, which means most people want to get sold before winter. They want to get sold before winter kicks in, and they know, oh, it's going to be next spring now before I can sell it. I want this off my hands. So if you can find a property that's 120 days old, you can tell that they're like, hey, we kind of want to get this offloaded before the end of the year. That gives you a lot of clout in any kind of negotiation, because you can say, hey, we'll do this now. We'll make sure we get you closed before the end of the year, things like that. You might also find they're doing what's called a 1031 exchange. Now, it's kind of complicated, but essentially a lot of times that means that they have 45 days to sell that house, to use those funds to buy something else. And you'll find sometimes people are in the middle of a 1031 exchange, and they have a very limited legal limit to how soon they need to make an entire transaction where they're buying one house and selling another. And that gives you a big advantage as the person making an offer, because they may need to sell quickly. Other things you look for, are they trying to move? They've already moved, right? They've already moved out, and they want this house off their hands because they moved across this country or across to another state. Maybe they switched jobs. There's all these things, right, that you can find out. Why is it up for sale? Oh, because we just got a new job and I moved to Florida and now we just need to get rid of this house quick. And so, the sooner the better for us. So understand the timing and the reason for selling. The second big thing is you need to be able to prove whatever offer you give. If you're going to go super low, you need to be able to come to them and explain why that is. Or at least you'll typically do better with your lower offers if you can do that. So for example, we're closing in 2 weeks on a property we're going to use as an Airbnb, and the amount they were asking felt a little high. We obviously wanted to go a little low, but what we were able to do to bring them quite a bit down is to come to them with a lot of research and information. So when the owner went to look at all this, and we had links and proof and stuff like that, and he looked over it and said, yes, you're probably right. We are overpriced here. So in this case, it was kind of a unique piece of land. It had a river on it and things like that, but it also wasn't winter accessible, and it had a little tiny cabin on it. So we broke everything up and said, hey, little cabins are selling for this, land is selling for this, land with rivers is selling for this. When we balance all that out, and it looks like your next door neighbor just sold a couple weeks ago, right? And they sold for this. So we can assume that your parcel is worth just about close to that. Anyway, we came to them and we were able to go quite a bit down from what they were asking for, because we came in with proof. And they didn't hit us. I kind of thought they might hit us with, oh, we're just going to come a little bit down, and then we play this game, right? Down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. But because we came into them with so much detailed information about the value that we were coming at them with, they came significantly down, and we only had to go a teeny bit up from the value we came at them with. We got a pretty good deal on this property by coming in informed and proving ourselves to them. Now, again, this PropStream.com became very helpful in this process. We were able to look through, we were able to get all this information. We were also able to use the MLS, Zillow, things like that, but we were able to get all the information we needed to do this using websites like PropStream, Zillow, and a local MLS. And number 3 is, if you can, you'd like to negotiate any kind of repairs, upgrades, updates, anything like that into the loan. Now, here's the reason for this. Let's say you purchase a house for $200,000 a month. Let's say it's to make things simple, it's $2,000 a month that your mortgage is going to be. Now, you want to add an extra bedroom to make this worth more. That's going to cost you, depends on where it is, but that can cost you maybe $15,000 depending on what you're converting. So let's say you're going to add an extra bedroom for $15,000. That can come out as cash, meaning you have to come up with $15,000 more in cash, which for a lot of people is pretty hard to do. Or you can negotiate that into the loan and say, hey, we want to make upgrades. Can you give us $15,000 cash in part of this to rehab and update and fix some of these problems? And a lot of people are okay with that. The end price ends up the same for them, but you negotiate it just slightly different. And the reason you do that is it all builds into your first loan. So that $15,000 is maybe going to be $100 extra a month. Not a lot, $100 extra a month. That extra bedroom, if you look at the data, is going to bring you $200 to $300 a month, maybe up to $400 a month, depending on where you're at. So now you're able to get a couple $100 more a month. It only cost you $100 a month, and it's all built into one single loan that you already have. And you didn't have to come up with $15,000 in cash on the spot to make it all work. Now, moving through, if you're stuck here saying, well, how do I make the offer? How do I do all that stuff? It's really not as hard as many people think. All you have to do is reach out to a local title company in your area, which you can find on Google, find a good, highly rated title company. You can reach out to them and they'll give you docs like this one right here that you can throw into DocuSign, and it's just a simple fill out everything, and then you can send that in as an offer. And also this can be your agreement or your initial agreement as you start moving through the process. And that's my biggest tip here is if you're cutting the realtors and you're kind of new to this, title companies can be incredibly helpful. The title company is who's going to record the sale, make sure all that works and happens. And the title company will be very happy to help you work you through the process, give you all the paperwork, help you with any confusion you have. And some of them, depending on who they are, will be extremely helpful doing almost everything that a realtor would do at this point after the negotiating. All right. So we get it. We've got our offer down. The title company's given us the paperwork. We filled it out, sent it over. The buyer or the seller said, great, I'm in. Now it's time for financing. We need to figure out how we're going to finance this property. Most people come into this thinking I've got bad credit or I don't have the down payment. There's 100 different reasons not to do this. But I can tell you right now, there's so many ways to get creative with financing. And if you look at all the biggest gurus, the people that have come from nothing and built these real estate empires, a very big chunk of that came from their ability to get creative with financing. So I'm going to kind of go in the order of how I do things. And if you're brand new to this, how I would go about it, like best to worst almost. For me, the best case scenario, if you're brand new to this, is to get what's called an FHA first time home buyer loan. You're going to get a really low rate. You're going to have to put in a very minimal small down payment. And you can do this type of loan all the way up to a quadruplex, meaning you can do a duplex, a triplex, or a quad. Now, the only catch here is you do have to live in one of these units for the first year unless there's a qualifying life event. So you will have to probably move into one of these units for at least a year. Now, obviously, depending on where you're at in life, that may not be feasible for this. But the beauty of these loans is you're going to get a low interest rate. It's just a regular loan, and they tend to be much more lenient on credit. But most importantly, you can get it for like 3.5% down, meaning if you can get a $200,000 house or a $300,000 duplex, you're putting about $10,000 down, which most people can come up with over time. Even better, if you're buying a duplex or a triplex or something like that, and you're going to live in one unit and rent out the other ones, it's highly likely that the other units are already rented out, and you as the buyer are going to be able to count that as income. So the bank looks at your income, right, before they decide if they're willing to lend you money. Do they have enough to pay for this mortgage? You know, you may have enough to pay for your own mortgage, but you may be on the edge and it may not be feasible when they're looking at your current income for them to say, yeah, he can afford this. But if you buy, let's say, a triplex and you've got the other two units rented out for $1,000 a month each, they're going to take that $2,000, they're going to shave off about 25% of it, just to be sure, but then they're going to count that towards your income, which means that you can qualify for something that you normally would not be able to afford. But the bank says, yeah, you're right, you'll be able to rent that for at least $750 a month, and it's already got a lease in for $750 a month for more than $750 a month. So we're going to count that towards your income as we look at your total income to qualify you. Number two, you can just do a regular personal loan. This is just like if you've ever gone through any kind of loan, you go call a mortgage officer, it's just a regular normal loan. If you can't qualify for the first because you don't want to live in it or anything like that, you can go through this process. You can still qualify. You can still count the renter and their income, but you probably won't get the crazy good rates. You'll have a little bit of a higher rate, things like that. Number three would be probably one of the most ideal ones if you can convince the seller to do this, and that's seller financing. And we approach every property with that initially, saying, hey, are you willing to do some kind of seller financing deal? And what that means is you don't have to use a bank. You don't have to do the paperwork. You don't have to get approved by a bank. You just have to convince the seller that you're going to actually make those payments, and they'll hold the note for some amounts of time. We've gone anywhere from 6 months to 10 years on this. So you can get creative here and build it around what they want and what you can pull off. But just know that when that time ends, you are going to have to make the bulk payment, meaning you're typically going to have to refinance, go into a real bank, get the actual real money to pay off that seller at that point. Now, that's not to say you can't negotiate a traditional 30-year loan with sellers, because I've done that as well, but typically they're looking for something more short-term. So if you can, always approach saying, are you willing to do some form of seller financing? And the reason this is great is you can get things like lower interest rates. Some of them will do interest only for 6 months, and then you'll do the purchase. So I had one that we bought in October. They're willing to go through May before we actually have to finish out the payment. So it's just a short-term while we work through financing, sell another property, things like that, to make it work, and the seller's willing to do that. A more traditional seller financing, though, would typically be, hey, 5-10 years, we're going to pay you, and then there's going to be a balloon payment at the end. We're going to owe you the bulk of what's left at the end. And again, this depends on where the seller's at. Has it been on the market for 300 days? Hey, they're probably a little more desperate and willing to get creative with you. If it's been on the market for 3 days, they're probably a lot less likely to say, sure, let's do this slightly more complicated thing of seller financing. And finally, the last one is just a commercial loan. It's called a DSCR loan. If you have bad credit, the seller's not willing to finance, you can't get any of these other three things to work, you can always, if you can make it work, get a traditional loan. They're going to make you put 25% down. And what they're going to do is they're going to look at the actual property and they're going to do an assessment and say, we think it can make this much. And if that much can cover the mortgage, obviously there's more nuances there, but if that much works out in their algorithm, then they're okay to give you the loan. They're not going to look very hard at your credit. They're not going to look very hard at your personal income. They're going to look much harder. Just what does this property make and what can it make? And then they go from there. So you can even go into step 5 and get other people to finance deals with you if you've done this a few times. Like I said, there's a lot of creative ways to go about this. These are kind of the 4 that we've traditionally used. And typically one of these will work out for most situations. All right, let's talk about growing your empire. You've done the work. That was probably really complicated and hard to get that first property, and that's fine. That's just how it is. That's how it is for everybody. Getting their first property, it's hard to figure all out the hoops and the loops and figure out the financing. And sometimes you just barely make it work. And now how can I do that again? I'm here to tell you it gets easier every property you buy, and it gets easier financially. If you've ever built a snowman before, you know that you start with a little snowball. You start rolling that snowball and it doesn't grow very fast, right? It just picks up a little bit of snow and you're kind of going. But once it starts to get to a certain size, it really starts to grow quickly. And then you get to the top of the hill once the snowball's, about as big as your head, and it just picks up speed and can grow so quickly into this massive snowman. And it's going to be very similar as you build a real estate empire. It's going to be tough for the first two slow goings. After about 5, 6, 7 years, you're going to find it feels like you're almost just chasing this ball that's growing bigger and bigger and bigger because the system is built to help you. And I'm going to show you how this works. Let's pretend that we bought a $100,000 house. Now, again, we're using these for simple numbers. I realize that unless you're in Detroit, it's probably going to be a little more, but there are still plenty of opportunities in the $100,000 range as well. Now, let's wait 5 years. Okay, we bought that first house. You did the work. It was hard. I get it. It's complicated. Now you're sitting there for 5 years and it's maybe cash flowing $50 a month, $100 a month. Maybe it's just breaking even. That's fine. We're going to go high growth rate because I typically try to buy my properties in high growth rate areas. And from the last 7 years, we've definitely met this higher growth rate across a lot of the country. But we're going to click calculate right here and you can see bought it for 100, 5 years later, it's worth 130. So I now have $30,000 more in home ownership. That's money pretty much in my pocket. I have $30,000 more of ownership in that home. You get all that, right? The bank doesn't get that, you do. Let's go to an amortization schedule, right? This is essentially how fast you pay off the home. We get a loan for 100,000. We have a 30-year loan, 6% interest rate. We're going to go down to year 5. Somewhere between year 5 and 6, we've paid off $7,000 to $8,000. A little disappointing, honestly. Amortization kind of sucks in the beginning. That means total in equity in our home, what we own in it, right? We've got about $37,000, $38,000, and that can be pulled out. We refinance, we go to the bank and say, I want to finance again, but I want to do a cash out refinance. I want to take that extra money that I now have and kind of value in my home, and I want it in straight cash in my pocket. And the bank's like, great, we do this all the time. Let's do it. They had you $38,000. You take that $38,000, you throw in a few thousand of your own money that you've been saving up over the last few years, and you're able to go buy 2 more homes now for $100,000 each, just like that original one. Now you're 5 years in, you've got 3 houses. Now the beauty here is each of these 3 houses starts to do the same thing. They each start to appreciate. They each start to get paid down. It's not going to take 5 years now for you to get another $20,000. It's only going to take 2, maybe 3. Now you get another house, another 2 houses. By year 7 or 8, you've got 5, 6, 7 houses under your belt. And the snowball is now rolling down that mountain. You reach this point where every year you're refinancing or pulling out money from one of your properties and buying another one. And the next year you pick a different property, you're pulling that one out and buying another one. And you're constantly buying properties. And this is how these people turn into real estate moguls, is they just slowly build in the beginning and then they follow that snowball as it grows. And this isn't cheating a system. This isn't anything crazy or complicated. This is how the system is built to work. And this is how almost anyone that's built a real estate empire from scratch, this is how they've done it.
Just hang on, we're almost there.
Okay, so for our final section, probably the most important section that most people don't understand, but if you understand, can save you more money than pretty much anything else that we're going to be talking about. That's taxes. If you play your cards right and you do this correctly, you could potentially never pay taxes again. And I'm not saying you shouldn't, and I'm not getting into that argument. I'm giving you the legal right and the potential to not pay any taxes moving forward ever. 0. Donald Trump style. Nothing. So most people are familiar with the idea of expenses and income, right? Your rentals are going to make some income and you're going to have some expenses. Well, those expenses on the expense column are a write-off, right? They erase some of your income, and by erasing some of your income, you pay less taxes. Now, the beauty of real estate is there are expenses that are kind of invisible in real estate, and that's called depreciation. Now, when we buy a property, you and I know that when I bought this house, it appreciated, right? The house over the last 5 years has grown a ton in value. But on paper, in the government's mind, the house has depreciated. And what they do, they actually think that over a period of 27.5 years, most things depreciate down to 0. Whatever they start at is their main value, they depreciate down to 0. So the government lets you break down your house and pieces of your house into 27 parts, and once a year, you're able to wipe them off your taxes. So these are invisible losses. They're not real losses. They're losses on paper where you report to the government and the government has built it this way. You say, I lost money this month. My house depreciated by $10,000, my house and the things in it. But you say my house depreciated, so I lost that money. Now, you didn't really lose that money, right? You gained money. You appreciated. We just showed you the math on that. But on the tax front, you lost money. Now, even better than that is there are a few different ways, but the primary one is what's called becoming a real estate professional, where you actually put a lot of your time into this, like part-time, 40, 20 hours a week, something like that. And you're actually able to wipe out income from pretty much anywhere. So you've got a W-2 job, right? You're paying taxes there. You've got a side hustle money coming in. You're able to wipe out income from all different directions using this depreciation. And they'll let you accelerate it, meaning instead of breaking that chunk of what you're able to wipe out into 27 pieces, right? We take our house, break it into 27 pieces. They let you squeeze that into one single year, and in a single year, write it all off. This gives you the ability to wipe out everything you made that year and probably moving forward into a lot of future years. And the best part is it's oftentimes more than you actually spent on the house because there's a loan involved. For example, we just purchased an Airbnb for about $600,000. Now we put in about $130,000 in cash into that loan. But we were able to depreciate the entire thing, and the total amount there was closer to $180,000. What that means is we paid $130,000, and we were directly able to eliminate an additional $50,000 from our taxes. That can wipe out all your W-2 income, that can wipe out all your income from real estate, that can wipe out next year's income, right? It wasn't necessarily a real loss. Now, obviously, things do depreciate and get old and have to be fixed, but it was mostly a paper loss. And this is how you see these real estate moguls, these Donald Trumps, right? These professionals, they make so much money, but they pay $0 in taxes because these invisible losses are stacking up. And even though they're building this real estate empire, their taxes show them as losing money year after year after year. And I'm not here to argue the politics of that, whether it's right or wrong. There are reasons that they do it. But again, that's the reality of it. That's how the system's built. That's how pretty much everyone in real estate is doing it. And that's how you can do it as well.
You have come far.
All right. A small percent make it this far. Usually only about 10% of people make it to the end of what these big, long, hour-long tutorials. If you have, congratulations. It means you're taking it seriously. I'd love to answer your questions, especially if you made it to this point. I want to give one more brief thought. For our family, we have loved more than anything, and what we have really enjoyed is the Airbnbs. They've been more stressful and honestly a little less profitable over time, but we have just loved being able to go as a family and visit for free these cool places. Our kids have built connections to these places. They've started to love some of these places where we have Airbnbs, and they've been able to help in the management of it. When we go up, they help fix things. They help set things up, right? They're involved in this. It's been a really fun thing for our family. And so if you're looking for a direction and you're in a similar place in life to me, that's where I'd start. And again, we're all different. It hasn't been as lucrative and it's been a lot more complicated in terms of time, but wow, have we enjoyed it. Thank you for watching the entire video.